Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel, and welcome to the 2023 Toyota Crown, which happens to be the 16th generation Toyota Crown. Yes, the Toyota Crown is not a new model. It's actually one of the oldest models in the Toyota lineup. Those who are born a lot before 1955 will remember the Toyota Crown actually made a small debut in the world that nobody really looked at. And fast forward all those years, here it is back in the US. Very different, just a surprise, let's put it this way. In today's video, we're going to take a look at this car. We're going to do a proper technical review. We're going to look under the hood, underneath it, inside, outside, to see how Toyota is doing in the 16th generation of their Crown right after this. Let's start our technical review under the hood. So the Toyota Crown could be optioned with two powertrains. One of them on the lower trims, other than the Platinum, is going to be your standard hybrid powertrain. So the engine on that will be the A25A FXE. The transmission will be an eCVT P710. Do not mistake that with a regular CVT. eCVTs, hybrid transmissions from Toyota, they're super reliable, and that powertrain have been around for a few years. It's proven, has very little issues, and I think it's a great choice to put in this car. To give you kind of perspective, the powertrain in the non-hybrid Max like this one is exactly the same as a RAV4, a later generation RAV4 23 and up. But this one is the Platinum. So this has the Hybrid Max, which is an all-new hybrid system that Toyota has come out with. And we're going to heavily focus on this one because I think that's what's new. Everything else, I have multiple videos on my channel explaining exactly how the other hybrid system works. So this hybrid system, let's start with the engine. The engine is an all-new 2.4 liter, 4-cylinder, turbocharged, direct and port injected engine. This engine is the T24A FTS. It's a 2.4 liter, 4-cylinder. It is very, very similar, or basically derived from the A25A, the 2.5, which now basically in every single Toyota and Lexus model, almost. This engine, though, got modified for the turbo and for a few other things, and especially in this Hybrid Max powertrain. So let's talk about some of its mechanical details. The valve cover at the top is plastic, same as the A25A, but then they did something that is very un-Toyota-like and not welcome. So in the A25, you had your coils at the top, you had your high-pressure fuel pump for the direct injection. Very simple. If you want to remove it, yeah, you got to pull the high-pressure fuel pump. Not a big deal. 2 bolts and it's out. But in this one, they decided to put the injectors right on top of the valve cover. Everybody's doing this, and it's a horrible idea, because should you need to remove this valve cover, that means you have to remove the injectors. That means you have to replace all the seals on the injectors, and then some of these injectors over time will get seized in there, and now you need more special tools to pull the unnecessary complication to achieve 0.0091 more miles per gallon, just so you can have that injector exactly at the right place. Yeah, very surprised to see this in Toyota line. So the A25A had the injectors on the side underneath the intake manifold, which is a great place for it. This, not so much. Moving on from that, cylinder head is a 2-piece cylinder head. This does have roller rockers and hydraulic lifters, dual VVTi engine. However, and this is where things kind of go back and forth, unlike the A25A, this does not have the clever VVTi. This just has regular oil control, which is simpler actually. You just have 2 solenoids in the front, the bolt that holds the VVTi gear. It is the oil control valve. Very simple design, very trouble-free, and even if it does have trouble, it's very simple to service. Now this engine has 2 timing chains, one of them from the cams to the crank, one of them for the oil pump. The oil pump is a variable oil pump that is electronically controlled, very similar to the A25A. And it's also similar to the A25A. This has a double front timing cover. So there is timing cover, chain and everything, and then another one behind. The reason they did that is to eliminate the infamous front timing cover leak. It's an area where the cylinder head and the block and the front cover meet, and there's sealer. All older Toyota engines had that, and that's where they all leaked from. Well, this one doesn't have sealer. It just kind of the inner cover bypasses that area. It's a beautiful design to solve a problem that we're still debating if all this was worth it, because it does have quite a bit more components to resolve that one problem. Moving on from that to the fuel system. This has Toyota's D4S, so you have port and direct injection. The fuel pump sits right on the valve cover, as we talked about, and unfortunately the injectors are on top of the valve cover. Fuel pump in the tank sends fuel here, splits it into the two, and the computer controls which one we are doing. Moving on to the cooling system. And this engine has 2 or 3, in a way, cooling systems. Let's talk about the engine one. So the engine one is not over the top complicated, but it does have a coolant distribution valve, a 3-way valve that changes the direction of coolant to optimize your warm-up time to make it less. But one thing interesting, this has a mechanical water pump, even in this. That was kind of a strange thing. The A25, even in the non-hybrid configuration, has an electric water pump, which was kind of a leap forward in technology, and it made things much better. This one doesn't. Back to the belt-driven water pump. And then this engine, of course, is turbocharged. Twin-scroll turbocharger sits all the way in the back, our least favorite place. This turbocharged is oil and coolant cooled. It does have 2 good things about it. The first thing is the wastegate is vacuum operated. Yes, some people will laugh at that, but actually that's the more reliable route. Maybe not the fastest reacting route, but it is the more reliable one. I mean, you have basically a mechanical little door that opens with vacuum and vacuum hoses and a little solenoid. That's all this thing has, which is pretty simple. And then the second good thing is this has liquid to air intercooler. Doesn't have an air to air or all the piping. You just have the liquid to air intercooler. Very cool. But because we have a liquid to air intercooler, we do need a separate coolant circuit for that. But here's what they did with that, which was kind of interesting to me. They combined the intercooler circuit with the hybrid system circuit. So now you only have actually 2 cooling systems for this car, not 3, which technically there is 3. Let's talk about the hybrid system, which is specifically the Hybrid Max system. See, here's what Toyota, this is just my imagination, how they started with this system. They scanned their conventional hybrid system and they noticed 2 problems. One of them is that droning out of the CVT was a bit much for some drivers. And the second thing is hybrids historically didn't make a lot of power. They were not very powerful. They're not meant for that. So with this new hybrid system, they actually solved both of these problems. And here's how they did that, how this whole thing works. So this is called a 1-motor hybrid system. Just like the word says, this has 1 electric motor. Mated to this engine is a 6-speed automatic transmission. Conventional clutch automatic transmission, nothing really special about it, except everything about it. Because part of this transmission is 2 unique things. One of them is the electric motor, which is in front where the torque converter would be. And then there is a wet clutch called K0. That clutch is what makes the magic. Toyota, in the technical side of things, they're heavily advertising this as a torque converter-less transmission. And that's exactly what it is. Here's how that works. So the motor is always connected to the transmission at all times. The engine is connected to the motor through the clutch. So when you engage the clutch, you engage the transmission to the motor to the transmission. So when you're driving in EV mode, say the engine is off, you're driving in EV mode, the clutch is disengaged, therefore the engine is not connected. The electric motor is driving the transmission directly and driving the wheels. When you want to start the engine, you're going to apply power to that motor, electric motor, and engage the clutch. Now the engine and the motor are connected and it starts. Let's put a mental note here, because that's one of the limitations of this system. Then if you want to drive the car with the engine and charge the battery, you're going to engage the clutch, turn the motor, start the engine. Now once the engine is running, you're going to keep the clutch engaged. The engine now will turn the clutch, turn the motor and the transmission, but now the motor is being turned by the engine and it's going to generate and charge the battery. But if you need maximum power and you need both of them to drive exactly the same, just instead of that motor generating, we're going to apply power to it. And it's going to give the transmission another boost, and off we go. This is a very efficient system. It's not as efficient for gas mileage as a standard hybrid, but it still gets pretty impressive gas mileage. And the byproduct of all that is it's very fast. It makes a lot of power. I mean, this thing makes 340 horsepower. It feels every bit as powerful as a V6 and as smooth. And that is the cool thing about this. This is the future of hybrids, folks. Everybody is upset about V6s going away. I am one of them. There's nothing beats the smoothness of a V6. But if this is how the future looks like, we're doing pretty good, because this powertrain is very nice. Now, speaking of that limitation we talked about, see, because we have this clutch and the motor, and let's put a scenario here where this becomes a little bit of an issue. You're driving in EV mode. You're driving at 50 miles an hour. Well, that motor is also spinning almost at the same speed. You want to start the engine. Well, that jerking effect of the engine kind of starting is going to jerk the whole car, and we're spinning at a higher speed. So here's how that's going to go. The transmission will actually go into neutral, motor will engage, start the engine, and then it re-engages gear, and off we go. So occasionally, when those transitions are happening, there's a slight delay, and sometimes it is noticeable. But again, that is a limitation of the system. And the second thing that is a little on the annoying side, when you're at very low speed and you're kind of creeping, you let go of the brake, the motor is not very smooth at low acceleration. I feel like that is something they could have resolved. I feel like it's applying too much torque and kind of shaking the car. And you notice that even in reverse. And that's kind of the interesting thing. There has been a lot of changes to the old hybrid system to make this one work. Let's talk about some of those changes. So the front motor has its own inverter, which kind of takes the voltage, sends the voltage to the battery, does all this stuff, kind of the brains of the operation. That used to sit right here in hybrids. Now it moved a little bit down and sits directly on the transmission to kind of compact things, because this transmission is actually huge. And to make all that fit, the DC to DC converter moved up, and now it's a separate component. The DC to DC converter, for lack of a better word, it is your alternator, because this engine does not have an alternator. So that DC to DC converter is what you see sitting here, the inverters underneath it. But Toyota took it to the next level with this powertrain. They didn't just do this and leave it alone. They actually completely revamped the all-wheel drive in the back. See, conventional hybrids, they'll just have a motor in the rear differential that just drives the rear wheels, and then when you need to charge, they just charge and that's it. But in this, they put a massive motor in the back, and it does actually a lot more than just drive. It's a very powerful motor. It also gives a boost to everything. But in order to kind of run that motor, they had to put an inverter as well in the back. Now that unit is very similar to that of the not very good electric car that they have, the BZ4X. It's a similar motor. That was not a very good car, but that is a very nice setup in the back. Does take up quite a bit of space. We're going to look at it when we look underneath the car. And more little stuff. Just from a mechanic working on Toyota for almost 20 years now, looking at this, I will tell you a few things. This is made in Japan, and I can tell. Because everything you touch here, the quality of plastics, I mean, plastic is something that people usually don't like under the hood, but the quality here is very high. And you can immediately tell just by opening the hood, touching a few things, looking around. It's very high. Space and access is medium. Space in the back is very tight with the turbo. So anything with the turbo, costs will start rising up. In the front, space is decent. You do have a drive belt that needs service. The front, actually, there is some space, which is nice. But then there are the little stuff. If you look all the way here by the hinge, we have an active hood. So the idea of this is, if you hit a pedestrian, these little charges, they're actually basically a little airbag, will lift the hood up. So the severity of the injury of hitting a pedestrian would be less. This is something that came from Lexus. The LS has this. I don't know how well it works, but just plan on not hitting pedestrians, please. Things happen, I understand, accidents happen, but plan not to do that, because you got a lot more stuff to worry about. These things are very expensive, and it actually damages the hinge when that happens. Moving on from that, the engine cover. Some of you have mentioned in previous comments and other videos, this is just a beauty cover. Some people actually have a habit of taking it out and throwing it out. Please don't do that. In cars that this is just a beauty cover, it's actually a sound insulator, so don't throw it out. We like quiet cars. But in this engine particularly, you should never throw it out because it's actually a functional part of the cooling system. If you look all the way here, there's actually a perfect channel of air, picks up the air from the fans, channels it here, across the turbo, and there's even another panel here, and then out the bottom. Do not remove this cover because then you will interrupt this and the under the hood temperatures will start rising. And then there is something more interesting. See, this is the T24A. The oil this engine takes is 0W20. Many reviewers have said it takes 0W8. They're actually incorrect. This one takes 0W20. But if you have the hybrid model with the A25A, that one takes 0W8 oil, which this one. Any mechanic over the age of 18 years old will tell you this is slippery water. It's very thin oil. They are really pushing the envelope with these oils. We thought 0W16 was too thin, but the engines were optimized for it. Now we have 0W8. But there's a problem with the 0W8. It's not available. Very hard to find this oil right now. Eventually, supply will catch up and we'll be fine. But then there's a much bigger problem. This costs $20 a quart. So if you have a regular hybrid one, if you find it, it is $20 a quart. So that's $100 in oil alone. That's a problem. I mean, small rant here because it has to be said for your sake when you own these cars with 0W8. If we start mass producing cars that use a specific oil, shouldn't we make sure that that oil is readily available? These are not exotic cars. These are everyday cars. Yeah, 0W8 is a problem if you own one of these cars with a 0W8, which is not just the Crown Hybrid. It's actually other models. You might want to start shopping for this from now because come oil change time, you might not find it. Let's take a look underneath the Toyota Crown. And everything is covered up. That seems to be the fashion with newer cars. They do give you the access for a simple oil change, but everything else, fortunately, you have to remove all kinds of covers. Let's start with the front suspension. Now, this is a dual piston caliper. Makes sense. This is somewhat of a larger car, so I think that makes sense. Aluminum knuckle, which is the bearing will weld itself to in the future. Steel lower control arm with the separate ball joint. This is a very simple design that Toyota has used for a long time. Something pretty interesting here that changed, and it's new to me at least. This sway bar is aluminum, and it's a very large section in the middle. Historically, when Toyota have used aluminum with their sway bar links, things have not gone well, and they usually end up reverting back to the metal ones that work much better. Toyota makes one of the best sway bar links. They're always made of metal. This one is aluminum. I see a change in the future of this one. The steering here is electric and the motor is actually outside. It's covered up, you can't see it, but this is very similar to a Camry setup where the motor is not on the steering column, it's actually outside. Things are pretty covered as you get here. Of course, this is a front-wheel drive based car, so your transmission is here, that's the whole thing. And then there's basically nothing here. There's no drive shaft going in the back. We'll talk about that in a bit. But the exhaust takes kind of an interesting turn. But before we move on to the exhaust, I have to say one thing. This exhaust, a little bit less than the standard we're used to from Toyota. This flex pipe right here, that's not a good idea. I wish they would have put a flex joint. And then I bring your attention to one thing that is a little bit of a concern. This flange right here, see how small this flange is? I mean, one thing Toyota used to pride themselves in is how large their flanges are and how heavy duty built their exhaust is. This just doesn't feel like this. There's a gap, and things are going on the cheaper side, unfortunately, here. The fuel tank, this is a fuel tank right here. Surprisingly, they put it in this orientation and curved the exhaust away. The battery still sits right on top of it, so that's how they decided to do this. And then you just have this open void. There's nothing actually here. Then we move all the way to the back to somewhat of a unique-ish rear suspension. So this is multi-link rear suspension, single piston caliper with the electronic parking brake right on it, which is very nice. But this particular arm here, these two arms, are actually somewhat new, and I haven't seen it in a lot of other models. Now this does have the separate spring from the shock, and one thing very nice, these are adaptable shocks, so when you change the drive mode, they change the dampening of the shocks. I love this style, especially in the front, where they put the actuator on the side, not on top, which is something they've done in the past. This is a much better design, which I really like. This is the motor, and on top of it is the inverter. And you notice it also has coolant running to it. Possibly very hard to show you on camera, but this is a massive unit. This is what I told you, the Hybrid Max has a very large unit in the back. It does have the inverter on top, has coolant going to it, so you have coolant pipes. You can see them right here running all the way to the front for the rear unit. Pretty interesting. This does make a huge difference in the way this car drives, and it adds a lot of the power to it. The exhaust is a single muffler in the back that splits into two. They don't have tips. They do have somewhat of an open area here. They try to cover some of it here, but it's still pretty largely open area, and that's pretty interesting to see. The one thing I note is the exhaust hangers. These are the same style as Toyota always have used. They're very good. They last the life of the car and you won't have any issues. But I'm noticing newer, cheaper feeling ones like this one. This just doesn't feel the same as the other one. They have to move on with the times, I suppose, but that's what they're doing. And another thing they're doing that they are learning from our friendly Germans, they no longer have wheel studs, they have wheel bolts, which is an idea that every single mechanic still wonders, why do we need bolts? What was wrong with the studs? We've been doing studs with Toyota for years and years, and now we have the bolts. I don't know what's the point, but that's what they deemed the future is with Toyota. Let's take a look at the outside of the Toyota Crown, and looks are very, very objective. I'm kind of undecided on the looks of this one, but let's start by section. In the front, I like that the headlights are small. It kind of has that new sedan look of Toyotas. However, the grille is closed. It's not an electric car, but that's what they decided to do. Interesting choice there. Kind of like this line right here. And then there's a similar line at the top that when the lights are on, it reflects inside of it. It almost looks like it's lit. The radar sensor is right here, which is nice and high. The Toyota emblem is up top. This is a two-tone color, which kind of gives this car an interesting look. One thing I have to be noted, this car is going to be built in Japan only, and for a Japanese car made in Japan by Toyota, the fit and finish, there are a few things that could be done better. Some of the edges, some of the pieces, how the gaps are, I expected a little bit better, but it's not the end of the world. On the side here, we do have a reflector. This is an international model, so they had to add that reflector for safety regulations in the US. 21-inch wheels. There was never anybody thought that Toyotas will have 21-inch wheels at some point, but this one does, and many others do as well. The wheel arch here is not painted, it's just flat black. I think if this was body color, it would have looked nicer. Then we move to the side, and this is where I feel like the team that designed this and the team that designed the rest of the car lived in different continents, if that makes sense. Because right up to this point, everything here is matching. You notice the fender has this little crease right here, and it ends here, and it kind of disappears here. It almost feels like there's something off. And then up to here, everything looks normal and matching, until you get to here. You can almost not see it, but there's actually a crease line that just appears out of nowhere, and then it continues. I don't know how I feel about that. It just looks odd and out of place, but it's there. And then there's this panel, which also kind of looks out of place. That's how they decided to design this. One thing very interesting about this, and this is where the Lexus Touch comes in. See, this is a Toyota. The front, you can lock it from here. This has a smart key, but so does the rear. That is usually reserved for Lexus models, but we have it in the Crown. And what we also have in the Crown is this line kind of disappears here and then it's gone. So I don't know what's that about. We'll make bodywork extremely difficult on this car. Then this is where the massive confusion comes about. You look at this looks like a hatchback, right? Well, no, it's a sedan. Before we get to the sedan part, you have this, looks straight out of an RX, in my opinion. This little glass. And if you notice something interesting, the belt molding kind of has a dip up and then it starts coming down again and we end. Very, very interesting shape. I don't know what they were heading with this, but that's what they decided to do. We got another reflector here for US regulations. Whenever you see that on a car, by the way, this is an internationally designed model that is kind of retrofitted to work with the US model. The back is another, yeah. I don't know how I feel about this back. It just has a very odd look to it. Do like the bar taillight and this pattern right here, which is a very Lexus-like pattern. Do like that they wrote Crown, big lettering. It's a very nice font, Hybrid Max, Platinum. I feel like there's a lot of badging going on. But very important feature here that is actually useless. The camera has a little washer next to it. All this washer does is just spray water all over the place and doesn't do what it's intended to do. Here's how that works. Then the biggest thing, is this a sedan? Is this an SUV? Well, it's not an SUV, but is it a hatchback? Well, it's not. Once I find the oddly placed button, this is actually a sedan. That was kind of a surprise. It has a trunk, which is a typical sedan, and typical sedan fashion, you do have a spare tire, which is very nice. But then you have, as we talked about when we look underneath it, the wheel studs. This is the wheel stud helper, and then this helps you kind of guide the stud in to get it started. This was actually pretty nice. I just wish this was not a flimsy, cheap plastic piece. I wish it was metal, but it's not. That's okay. The trunk is not the biggest trunk in the world. You have a lot of intrusion here, not as much there. The 12-volt battery lives right here, which is pretty standard in newer cars. Hood bays are getting more busy, especially this one being the Hybrid Max. But there's one more thing that is Lexus-like. They covered the hinges. Shouldn't they have just made this a Lexus? I think would have worked a little better. Maybe make it look like a normal sedan and call it the new ES350, but we didn't. That's okay. I just still can't get over the back look here, especially with that black going all the way around here. It just looks our objective. That's just my opinion. Let's talk about the interior of the 2023 Toyota Crown. And the first impression here is a very good one. I mean, this interior is very nice. The truth have to be said, they really did well here. Let's talk about some of the good things and some of the not so good things. The first thing is, this is an elegant, simple interior, but it's modern. Now, we are talking about a Toyota, so modern is going to be a conservative modern. But spending some time with this car, you'll get to appreciate that conservative, modern touch. The first thing is, this is a very easy interior to operate and use. It doesn't give you a headache. Everything is very simply laid out. There is not much that will bother you in this interior. We look at the HVAC controls. They're all physical. Doesn't really take any thinking to operate them. But what is the nicest thing about this interior is the Lexus touches. And that has to be said because they are really welcome here. Things like the cooled and heated seats. There's not only cooled and heated seats, they're automatic. So is the heated steering wheel. That is a Lexus feature. The other Lexus feature is the double hinge center console. That is 100% Lexus, folks. And moving past that, we look at the gauge. It is all screen here. And usually I am not very friendly with all screen gauges because I feel like they're useless and all they do is just look cool and raise the price of the car. But this one, I like what they did here. You can at least display your map here. You can customize it a little bit, although it can be a little confusing to customize it initially, but overall, I think they did good with this gauge. Now, the infotainment system, it's a pretty large screen, and it is Toyota's latest infotainment system. It is modern, it is glitchy and buggy and needs constant updates, but overall, it's okay. For as conservative as Toyota is, this is actually a leap forward. Then the rest of the interior. The shifter is a Prius shifter. It's pretty standard. You'll find it in a lot of newer hybrids and even on the Lexus side. Things are very simple. I like that the wireless charger, you actually put your phone in and it's not sliding or going anywhere. That is pretty nice. The seats are extremely comfortable, and that is a really welcome thing. The best way to describe them, they're well supported on the sides, but they're comfortable. They're not over bolstered. I have a really bad back. This is a very comfortable place to be in. And the visibility is really good in this car. It's a little higher off the ground, so the visibility is really nice. The fit and finish here is, we're going to give it another year or two. That's the best way to say it. There are a few things that are a little bit feel on the rush side production-wise, but the biggest concern here is some of the materials. Now, all the materials are soft and they're very nice, and that is very nice, but from experience, just the appearance of this on the doors panels and the top part of the dash, this is a material that Toyota has not used in a while, and now it's back. One thing about this material, you want to take care of it because it's very easily scratched and very easily damaged. Ask me how I know that. Now, there are other small touches that are actually pretty interesting. You notice this kind of gold accents everywhere. They're so subtle, but they're so nice. They're also on the seats. These are the nice things that give this car a little bit of elegance. What I like about this car also, they removed all your radio controls except on, off, and volume, and it's in the middle. And that's the place where it makes sense. The driver can reach it easily, so does the passenger. Everything else on the screen, I suppose we can live with that. Now, this car has a fixed glass roof, so kind of like the Prius, just opens and closes, but you can't actually open the glass itself. It's part of the roof and it's not movable. Let's take a look at the back seat. I am 5'7". This is my driving position. I have plenty of room, plenty of headroom. The battery sits underneath this back seat. You do have two vents, some USB-Cs here. Other nice touches here, the seat. It's not just leather in the front. The leather actually goes all around it, so there's not some cheaper material in the back. That is nice. These little things, they do make a small difference. Let's talk about some things I do not like about the Toyota Crown. And in reality, there's only one actual thing that I do not like about this car, which we're going to talk about in a bit, but there is kind of a cloud of confusion, which I also do not like about this car. What is this car? Are you an SUV? Are you a crossover or cross tour deal? Are you a sedan? Because you don't look like any of those things. It is not a Camry because it's slightly bigger than a Camry. It's not really an Avalon because it's slightly smaller than an Avalon. And then the biggest problem of this car is the Lexus ES 350, which is a sedan, clear, very refined, just like this one, and it costs exactly the same. See, this is the problem with this car. It is a super nice car. The execution of the inside, at least, is very well. It's very comfortable, very refined. I love it. But what is this car? Because it doesn't look like a sedan. It doesn't look like anything that it is. In my opinion, this might end up being a hidden gem in the future from reliability and comfort if you can get past the overall confusion of the look and what exactly this is. And that's the biggest problem. We're living in times where people take one look at a car and its design and decide if this is a good buy or not. This is not going to do it very well. That's the problem, because once you get past the look, you drive it, it's actually a very nice car. With the exception of one thing that I noticed during my testing here. So because of this new powertrain, I hope this is something they fix, because otherwise this is a very nice powertrain. Occasionally when you creep, like you kind of let go of the brake and let the car roll, you get like a jerking feeling, very noticeable. It even does it in reverse. So I would have hoped that Toyota, with their experience of hybrids and everything, that they would have take care of something like that, so basic, because the Tundra doesn't do that, which basically has a similar style hybrid system. I was kind of surprised to feel that here, knowing that we are talking about a Toyota and their experience with hybrids, and we have something like that. That is probably the only concern I have about this car, other than what is it exactly? So should you buy a 2023 Toyota Crown? And folks, the truth have to be said, this one is a tough one. Let me explain. If this was meant to be the replacement of the Avalon, I think they did a really good job. Mostly. The interior is super nice, very refined, not over the top, has a lot of Lexus in it, makes it feel very high-end, very refined. This powertrain, super refined. It feels powerful. You do not miss the V6 here. But then, if this was truly replacing the Avalon, see, the Avalon had a problem, and I see the same problem here. The Avalon used to be a plush grandpa's car. But guess what? We love grandpa. Grandpa has experience in life. There was a need for cars like that. They turned it into a sporty car to attract younger buyers. Younger buyers will usually not want to spend $50,000 on a sedan. And if they are, they're going to want it to be a really fun car, not a grandpa's sedan. So they turned the Avalon into something that nobody, nor the young people, nor the old people, will buy. So that's why they discontinued it. I see the same problem here. See, this car has so many personalities at the same time that it's too much. You look at the outside. Well, is this a sedan, or is this an SUV, or is this kind of a cross mix between the two? It's not. It's neither. It's not really a sedan because it doesn't look like a sedan, but yet it is. And it's not really an SUV because it doesn't have the SUV back. And it's not as low as a sedan, but it's not as high as an SUV. So that's the first problem. You go inside the car. It's very modern, but very conservative at the same time. Very easy to use, and that's the Avalon good stuff. Under the hood, this engine is very powerful, and this car has Sport Plus mode. I think Grandpa will appreciate Sport Plus mode. And then the two-tone paint and everything, everywhere you look, there's just a conflict of what this car is. I don't know what it is, honestly. And as nice as it is, and as nice as this powertrain is, I will say one thing. As a Toyota Crown, if you're new to the Crown name, this might impress you. But if you've driven previous Crowns overseas, this is not it. Because the Crown used to be a high-end luxury car. It used to rival the Lexus LS. That's what the Crown was. This is not. This is basically a little bigger than a Camry, a little smaller than an Avalon or an ES. Speaking of the ES, which is the biggest problem for this car, the price of this car. The Avalon was just below the price of the ES, and it was so close, but people said, well, we can go with this. This one is exactly the same price as the Lexus ES. And I'm sorry, the Lexus ES does not have the confusion of what exactly this is that this one does. So that's the other problem. Why don't you just buy a Lexus ES? It has the same refinements as a V6, and it's a Lexus. That's the problem with the Crown. Because otherwise, this is a very nice car. But if they would have just focused, make this just a long sedan, normal, or make it into an SUV, which they do have plans to do. And this is even the more confusing part. They want to make the Crown a line of cars where you have this, the SUV, the this, the that. Why? Why don't you just bring a Crown and call it a sedan and call it a day? Why the confusion? I don't know. Somebody in the marketing department perhaps had an ambitious plan. That's the only way I can say it. Folks, I hope this video is helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you. You have yourself a wonderful day.